Hello, and welcome to our session on collaboration across the Crown dependencies and overseas territories. I'm Lara Axel, Chief Executive of Digital Isle of Man, an executive agency in the Isle of Man Government Department for Enterprise. I'm pleased to be joined today by Lucy Kirby, Director of Digital Greenhouse Guernsey, Tony Moretta, CEO of Digital Jersey, and Paul Astengo, Senior Executive of Gibraltar Finance within the Government of Gibraltar. I'd like to thank my guests today for taking the time out to spend time with us to discuss some of the challenges around their own jurisdictions and understand our collective successes and perhaps how we can work more collaboratively moving forward. I think it's true to say there are many similarities across our jurisdictions, particularly around the markets we operate in, but do we see ourselves as competitors?
Thank you. That's a really interesting question. I think it's definitely depends on who you're talking to in terms of stakeholders. And I think you're right that there's a lot of similarities between particularly small island nations, but actually what we're now seeing, because of the changing ways of work, of the ways in which people are recruiting, for example, that actually a lot of those challenges that used to only be island issues are now becoming very much global issues. So I think we do have more similarities than differences. Do we see each other as competitors? I think when it comes to some of our KPIs, I think that can definitely drive certain behaviours that would mean that actually there is competition between the islands. But I think we also have different specialisms. And that's where we see particularly our global companies, but also some of our emerging startup and scaling businesses using the islands in different ways for different expertise and different functionality. And I think that's where the collaboration can really come into play.
Surprisingly, no, in many ways. I would say I don't think we are competitors. I think occasionally, and Lucy's probably had the same experience, I think people will say, look at the Channel Islands and we'll look at Guernsey and Jersey. I think one of the things we find is obviously it's very easy for people to do their research these days. So by the time people perhaps come to us, they've either got a connection with Jersey, they're looking for a particular specialty or cluster, as Lucy said. And because I think we all have sort of, in many ways, different economies, different focuses, different setups, I think people have done their homework and they have a reason for coming to one of the jurisdictions. So I think it surprises a lot of people that, you know, we don't see each other as competitors, maybe, or saying we don't. But no, I would generally say not. I think we have similar challenges, but I don't think we're competing for the same, whether it's relocations, individuals, or business.
That's quite an interesting answer there. I personally think that there are competitors and competitors, so it's more the case of how do you compete with each other. I think we do chase similar business in many respects, which is inevitable, as we all have similar underlying beliefs in that we look for quality, compliant business. But I believe that we have particular individual strengths and preferences as well. We all start from a position of political and financial stability. Physically in Europe, even if Gibraltar is no longer in the EU. I should point out that we're not a Crown dependency, we're a British overseas territory. But we also all enjoy an excellent mutually beneficial relationship with the UK. So I would suggest that, for example, that Gibraltar is ahead of the game as far as regulating distributed ledger technology is concerned. And we're also very strong on motor insurance. On the other hand, we have always admired the work done in Jersey and Guernsey over an extended period in wealth structuring, where there is undoubtedly deep expertise. And with the Isle of Man has a well-deserved reputation in banking and other aspects of insurance as well. So I think we all, would like more business. Do we compete with each other in a bad way? I don't think so. I think we compete from a basis fundamentally that we're trying to do the right thing in the right way.
I think, from the Isle of Man as well, we see the Crown dependencies and Gibraltar and some other small island jurisdictions that are held up. And I think Tony mentioned KPIs, in terms of what their measures of success are compared to what we've seen on the Isle of Man. And that can sometimes lead into a bit of a competitive mindset. But actually, we all do have quite different propositions, even when we're in similar markets. And we're all relatively small voices within a large global arena. So it's when we think about who our competitors are, it's probably our key competitors are other people besides the other small island nations. So that kind of really does open up the possibility for us to work together and have that single voice, perhaps. I think when we kicked off blockchain on the Isle of Man, and we were looking quite a lot at Gibraltar's DLT certification at that time. Through that process, we started using the word cooperation quite a lot, which I quite enjoyed as a concept. And I do think that that's probably a good word to consider how we could work together. I think there's definitely lots of opportunity. The global markets that we're after, whether it's in the finance sector, whether it's in e-gaming or blockchain, or some of those wider sort of technology fields that we're working in, are so vast that we can all do incredibly well in those markets, and still hardly make a dent into the opportunity that's out there. So there's got to be a smart way of working around that.
Okay, so undoubtedly the structure of how we market Gibraltar as a financial service jurisdiction has developed over time, and it will continue to do so. I'm sure the same with the other jurisdictions as well. There was a big push on our part to look at our structure, resources, etc. some 9 years ago, as we felt that we needed to do more than we were doing. It required us to increase our presence in existing markets, particularly the UK, and more particularly London. We also needed to take a close look at the new markets where we were prepared perhaps to invest in and look at spending some time and money there. For example, we reviewed our online marketing strategy where we were weak. We referenced a lot of good practice, substance and style on websites and social media was developing from the other jurisdictions. We thought that you did that much better than we did. In fact, I don't think we felt that we were even at 0.0 at that point. Also, when snooping around and seeing what other people were doing, the depth and variety of in-person events and the level of our activity was very apparent to us. And whilst not exactly mirroring what we saw, there's a lot of very well thought out strategic initiatives from the other jurisdictions. More recently, other jurisdictions have created a digital strategy, and how this was formulated and implemented has been of great interest to us. And we've now had some initiatives that we've started as a result of what we've seen from digital strategies that were set out and laid before the population.
Yeah, I think very similar from our side, looking at the other jurisdictions to understand what their best practice is. And there's been some great examples of things where we thought actually from an initiative perspective, there's some very interesting learnings from all the people around this table and wider afield as well. And I think there's a real strength in thinking around, for example, you've just mentioned digital strategies, around how we can use those to tie back to where we're going as a jurisdiction. I think also where we can tie into each other's from a collaboration point of view, but being able to drive forwards initiatives and programs that are able to meet some of those sort of more central aims and objectives, and I think get best value out of other activity that's happening across the island, whether that's supporting the finance sector, whether that's supporting other agency areas, the relocation areas, or even the tourism areas, connecting the dots together and having that relationship internally as well as with industry, I think is really beneficial to getting most value, if you like, out of the activity that's taking place.
It's a really interesting question, and it's been great. Just over the last couple of months, we've had groups over, Lyle and his team, and a delegation over from Guernsey. And it's always interesting to hear how different jurisdictions have addressed some similar challenges. I would look, it's always easier, particularly if you're talking to politicians, you're trying to get funding, if you can say, well, actually, if someone else that's a similar size has been able to do X, Y, and Z. So, looking around the screen, I'm very jealous of Gibraltar that's invested in education and their own university. We had some good chats with Lyle, and I think one of the advantages, there are a few, of being part of government rather than being arm's length, which is one of the differences I think we have certainly with the other Crown dependency is that you get a better buy-in to immigration policy and things like that. And talking to Guernsey about some of the things they've been doing to help local businesses as well, looking at emulating schemes like EIS investment schemes, things like that. However, I think one of the things we focus on, while there's a benefit of looking at other similar jurisdictions, we all have problems of scale. We all have challenges that we don't have the sort of institutions that larger countries have. And I think one of the things that we focus a lot on is what can we learn from bigger countries, and not just the UK. We all have a dependency on the UK. The UK is good at lots of things in digital, but it's not great at everything. And I think one of the things that we can perhaps all learn from each other is where there are opportunities to learn from jurisdictions outside of this group. And other countries. I think we all have a great advantage as small, relatively independent jurisdictions, is that we don't just have to follow what the UK do. We can pick and choose from best practice around the world, and that can be a challenge. But again, I would think we can all learn lessons from what is happening in research and development, from universities around the world, from other research institutions. So I think we can learn from each other, but I think we all benefit from not just looking at other similar jurisdictions, but looking at bigger places as well.
And so I agree with a lot of what's been said so far. And if I just again look around the screen, I know when we, as I just said, when we started looking at our blockchain strategy, it was at a similar time as Gibraltar was coming out with the DLT certification. We certainly looked at that. We also, I think Abby went over to Gibraltar to look at the safer gambling initiative there, which was also very interesting. Going down to see Tony and his team in Jersey, apart from all the glitzy offices that you have down there and the fantastic facilities, which we're incredibly jealous of. We had some really productive conversations around what was going on in fintech and what was going around in the skills area. We see that in Guernsey as well, and I see there's some real opportunities around skills, an issue that we all struggle with, and we see as a global issue at the moment, to pull our thoughts together. But for me, the most valuable thing that I've got out of visiting each of the jurisdictions so far is the understanding how other people with similar problems are thinking about solving those problems, and sometimes just having a sounding board or somebody who's doing a similar job, who've thought about things in different ways, has really created a lot of light bulb moments for us here. And it's those kind of conversations that you can't underestimate how much value they can bring. I think that's been immensely useful for us.
Lyle's already said, I think the biggest issue is skills. I mean, there's a skills shortage around the world. Recent history has made that even worse. We all share the common challenge, or certainly the actual Crown dependency share the challenge, is we are small places. We have an aging population. We don't have access to the higher education facilities that other places do. So we're not churning out people with those skills locally. In fact, I imagine we all have a brain drain problem, that we lose the bright young things and we don't get them back. And we all have immigration policies that can be restrictive. That creates a perfect storm that makes it difficult to get skills in all areas, not just digital. The finance industry has the same challenges as well. And so I think there is no bigger issue than skills. Interestingly enough, I remember pre-COVID at an event of Ireland Chambers of Commerce, sitting on a table with the Greek islands, who have worked together to create a university of the Greek islands. And I think perhaps working together on skills and what we can focus on, best practice, particularly at the time, and Lyle, you mentioned, we established a digital Jersey Academy. When so many courses can be done remotely, I wonder if there are opportunities on working together on the skills shortage that we all share, and addressing that. So I would say skills is definitely the biggest issue facing all of us. And to be honest, we all know that future businesses, the future economy, are built on a skilled workforce and skilled entrepreneurs. and we have bigger challenges as small jurisdictions than larger jurisdictions, obviously.
Skills, I completely agree with. I mean, it's not just something that I think we've all talked about in the past, but even across the different executive agencies in the Isle of Man, it is the number one issue. Digital skills in particular, when the size of your digital economy is proportionally larger than the size of the digital economy in the UK. Obviously, it has a more significant effect, and it can be harder to attract people, make people create the awareness of what our smaller jurisdictions have to offer to people who are seeking those kind of roles. So I completely agree. I see opportunity there, and there's a lot of learning that I'm sure we've all done around dealing with immigration routes. I know Gibraltar has a slightly different arrangement, so slightly different for you over there, but it's certainly been one of those key barriers that we've identified here. And I think again, Tony touched on this earlier as well. It's the there's quite a lot of risks that need to be taken in the digital space. We need to try new things, and getting people, convincing the government that these are the right things for us to do it can be a challenge. And if we've got a similar sized jurisdiction that's already taken that risk and it's borne fruit, that helps us massively make the argument that it's the right thing to do. And there you start seeing the opportunity to share risk and to do things differently. So that is really interesting. But yeah, I mean, this is I'd love to come up with more problems than skills, but skills is by far our biggest issue as well.
We've had Tony mention the C word, and just to add a little bit more to the pot, I'm going to mention the B word, if I may. So in our particular circumstances, Brexit has been an issue. It's been an issue for us in a number of ways, and we're not yet fully settled in what our new world will be like. There are different elements to it that we still haven't settled, although there's quite good clarity on the financial services side of things. But that's not finalized yet, and we'll continue to work hard to do that as soon as we can. For us, access to the single market was something that we were used to because of our relationship with the EU via the UK. Although I have to say, when Brexit happened and we overcame the first few days of total shock, and we started analysing our business, most of our business was in fact, and the percentage does vary, but it's about 90 to 92% of our financial services business was with the UK rather than the EU. So clearly I'd been doing a very bad job up until then in terms of gaining access to the EU market. For us, our relationship with the UK via the bilateral agreement that we have now since Brexit is an excellent opportunity for us. It doesn't entirely take the place of EU passport in skills. I think for anyone of our sort of size is always going to be an issue. We've worked very hard in parallel to developing, for example, the DLT structure to look at how we position the educational piece outside of just the standard rails. So the university is relatively new. It's not brand new, but it's relatively new, and created some courses, including smart contracts and stuff like that. And more recently, almost exactly a year ago, we created the Digital Skills Academy, run by a guy called Stuart Harrison, who has a background in education. He was head of physics. And the sort of work that he's doing in terms of across all the different age groups, from the silver surfers down to the young kids, in terms of, it's almost silly to say it, but even some of the most basic things, some Google courses and stuff like that, just to get people to understand what the opportunities are. So that's how we're tackling that. But it is a big issue because the businesses are growing. The thing about digital is that you don't necessarily have to be in one place. So you can be anywhere you want to and still be participating in the industry. So we want to give our community as much an opportunity as possible. We want to equip our community with the skills necessary. And we have to support the businesses that are relocating here and establishing here to make sure that they've got the right people to employ with the right sort of skills. So we do that on the basis that we reach out to them and we say, give us your wish list. we'll see what we can do to find solutions to that as well. And it's one of our greatness is our smallness. So to get around a table with people is a relatively easy thing compared to other jurisdictions that I've been in the past, where people have to come from far and wide. So, I think we share a lot of the challenges across the 4 jurisdictions.
It's fantastic from my point of view to hear everybody also chiming in on the skills front, because that's been something for me that's been a real sort of personal drive for all the time I've been involved here at Digital Greenhouse, as with a background in education. So, I think that absolutely is the human capital element is so important for everywhere, but particularly for sort of small island nations. And I think that also comes into a couple of elements that others have touched on, which is this positive and negative element around being able to work from anywhere in the world. We do have this different way of working now, but I'm not sure that our legislation is necessarily up to date to mirror that. So are we really sort of able to facilitate people working for local companies elsewhere? Do we have models that will allow that in an effective way? And I think as well that the challenge around skills, as I see it, is that we do have much more attention on this area now. People are recognising particularly the importance of digital skills, but we still have BAU for our businesses. So actually, when we've got recruitment crisis across all areas of the economy, it's actually quite challenging to make sure that the voice is heard and continues to be heard about the importance of upskilling in digital. And the importance of working for those roles that may not yet exist or are going to exist in the future, when there's even greater pressure on businesses to fill their roles right now. I think actually it's even harder to have that conversation about, yes, but what are the roles that we know are going to be automated, are going to need to change? And therefore, yes, we know you need X, Y, and Z right now, but actually we need to be thinking about what you need in 5 to 10 years' time. And I think that is a much, much more challenging conversation, given that everybody is now even more in need of individuals in their businesses.
I see today as a really good opportunity to sort of start that process, if you like, because the first thing that we need to do as jurisdictions, as long as that's what we're happy to do, is to sit down with each other, go through the common issues and challenges that we face, and then we can all just throw into the melting pot what sort of ideas we may have for changing that in the future. And we come up with some good ideas that the other jurisdictions pick up on, and vice versa. I think that would prove great value. I think it will help the common goals. And this is where the competitor area comes into, as far as I'm concerned. We'll still compete with each other for business, but we'll do it in the right way. And from that perspective, if we're all moving forward, if we're all being successful, I think that's a great place to be in. So I think the first stage undoubtedly sit down, discuss, set out a plan, set out a vision, and then try and decide how we're going to do that.
So I think there's a lot of opportunity to work more closely together, and particularly around the skills area. I think one area that's of interest is around those niche skills that are emerging, and how we can potentially look at things like communities of practice to support people who are building those skill sets, because those are the skills that are sort of most required globally. So maybe it's about how we could create some stickability by working together to create progression, opportunities, experiences that are going to develop particularly those more niche skills alongside our mainstream offer, the sort of more general digital upskilling. But I think that opportunity to look at communities of practice across our jurisdictions could be really valuable ways of supporting those individuals who are upskilling or who are really championing those emerging areas in digital.
there's obvious opportunities for us to be able to work together. I think we can all build some foundations that probably work for all of us. And I think in some cases, some of those foundations have already been started by some of us. Learn the best practice from each of our areas. Perhaps work towards common standards that make sense to people, and then agree how far we're going to go with that, to the point of, obviously, we all still need to attract people to our own jurisdictions as well, and understand how far we want to work together, and how to make the most of it for each of our areas. But I think equally, there's many opportunities for collaboration beyond skills as well. Skills is one of those really big areas that certainly us as Digital Isle of Man have struggled with for the past 4 years. We've not made as much of a dent in it as I would have liked. So keen to move forward on that. But there are some quick wins that I can see, again, looking around the table at some of our strengths are, that we can support each other to do some other things as well. I think skills can, whilst the most important topic we've all said that's the most important topic for us, it can sometimes feel all-consuming, and we can't forget some of the other things that we need to do as well. Certainly, that's the way I feel on the Isle of Man. But I think the journey started now. I think certainly we've been out and visited everybody, and I'd be keen to do that more. I'd be keen to get us all around a table, a physical or a virtual table, together to discuss some of these things moving forward as well, to understand what's important to all of us, and what we do want to do together to create that foundation.
So Paul made a really good comment about maybe making a new start as a result of this conversation. So a few concrete suggestions from me. So we published Jersey's digital skills strategy back in 2018. That was developed by UK University Business School. That's published on our website, and happy to share. We've just had the same team do a refresh of our digital skills strategy following COVID, the sort of changing world of remote work, as Lucy was talking about. We'll be publishing that in a couple of weeks, so I'm happy to share that. There'll be some things that are different, but as jurisdictions, there'll be a lot of similarities. So I think sharing pieces of strategic work where we think there are benefits, happy to do that. I think we also share the same challenges of having enough skilled teachers. A lot of this stuff in small jurisdiction comes down to individuals, as Paul mentioned, there aren't many places where you'd say who actually runs the college or the Digital Skills Academy, but that's the way it works. So I think sharing the teaching resource, we're running courses that are partly done remotely. There's no reason why someone can't log in from sitting in the Isle of Man or Guernsey or Gibraltar, as well as sitting at home or in an office in Jersey. I'm happy to exchange those. We've been fortunate enough to get government funding out of an economic recovery funds to run courses. And sometimes it's the basic stuff, as Paul mentioned. We can get caught up in digital skills, and we also have a mission about digital transformation generally across the economy. So a lot of it is upskilling the general workforce, whether that's financial services, whether that's hospitality, retail, or whatever. I also think we probably share challenges in getting enough people to fill those courses. That the Venn diagram challenge we all face of having the people that want to improve their digital skills, are capable of doing it, and are around and want to do it locally is a challenge. And I think if we pool our teaching resources in places, we pool our students as well and do things remotely. I'm happy to share we're having discussions with a number of UK universities who are all moving to online as well anyway. We've had a discussion with a number of faculties. I'm hoping that will make it easier for all of us, that students don't want to go back into the lecture theatre, and a lot of universities anyway. We haven't got long enough to discuss the reasons for that. But I think there are various initiatives that if one of us, back to what we said at the very beginning, we don't see each other as competitors. So I think we can all benefit from some of these initiatives, and we all have relatively small teams for what we're trying to do. And so if we can ride on the top of other work done in another jurisdiction, then I think that's a great thing to do as well.
A couple of good points there from Tony, if I may just jump in. And certainly in terms of what we do in what we're setting up and how we review what we're doing, and it's all very early stage still, one of the issues that we came about was that the people that we thought would flood in didn't. And when we try to find out why that was, what we established as the main reason is that if you wanted to be a lawyer or you wanted to be an accountant, the traditional routes, people understood exactly where the journey was. So, you know, what your aspirations could be, what the alternatives within that profession could be, and what the end result in terms of your career aspirations could be. But we hadn't worked on making that clear for the digital process. So we work hard on that. We also, as a learning point from that, took that start early so that people don't get bogged down by the alternative professions and they can see what the opportunities are. So Stuart, who I mentioned earlier, and who I've introduced to the Isle of Man, has, for example, classes in which he creates robots. So if you're a young, I have to say even myself as an older person, but if you're a younger person and you're creating a robot, you see this robot jumping around and stuff like that, it's fantastic. You know, it's really exciting and interesting. And a new direction that is esports. So a lot of children play PlayStation and all those sorts of things. But there is a career path that you could follow. Now, not everybody's going to be, as in the, if you look at the top level sports, not everybody can be a top level sportsman. Very few people, in fact, are. There's a greater opportunity in esports, but it's not sold only on being, I can use my controller and score the goals, but there's a whole structure behind them. So if you look at the recent Commonwealth Games in the UK, so you have the top, the Ronaldo of the esports, and then you have the people that are doing the logistics, and they're doing the marketing, and they're doing the fundraising. So it gets them involved in a digital world, but not necessarily just the fun bits, but it's all part of that team and growing and nurturing that team. So esports has been a recent addition to the innovation, and it is really, really interesting.
With regards to barriers, I think one of the challenges can be the unintended consequences of maybe how we're set up as well. I think to the sort of challenge of being that we've made reference before to some of the structures being internal, some being external, that we're working with. I think that there can be a challenge for collaboration in how that structure is put together, and therefore maybe what the expectations of our stakeholders might be. And you know, we talked earlier about culture, and we talked about being parts of small jurisdictions, which comes with real benefit in terms of knowing everybody and size and scale. And I think some of the connections that Paul was talking about, being able to name and connect people. But I think that does have a flip side to it. And whilst that can be really positive, it can also bring some challenges. And so I think back to the competition versus cooperation elements, a barrier may be the perception of some of our stakeholders of how we work together, and particularly when we're talking about challenging times around getting access to skilled individuals or relocation, whatever it might be. Actually, we need to be sensitive to some of those challenges. I don't think they're insurmountable at all, but there is about bringing our stakeholders with us, both from I think a political and government perspective, but also from an industry perspective, because we've found that where we've been able to be successful, it's been in partnership very closely with industry and working directly with businesses. So we would want to make sure that any of that cooperation and partnership moving forwards was done in hand with them.
I think the use of the term stakeholders is a very important one there. And I think our stakeholders, if we speak frankly, expect that first and foremost that we represent their interests. So how this would be structured, what sort of vision there is, what sort of parameters are set, I think is important, as much to give them the comfort that what we're trying to do is a collective mutual benefit rather than an individual benefit for one jurisdiction or the other, or that there's the risk that we might lose business because of something that we say or contribute. So I think that's a very, very key element to it. And really, if there's the right sort of attitude and there's goodwill to that, we could come up with something that says, this is what we're trying to achieve, this is how we're going to try and achieve it, and these are how we're going to manage any concerns that may come up from time to time from stakeholders as to what the outcome of all of this will be about. And I think the outcome is really very important. So you can't prejudge what that outcome can be, but you can set some goals and targets as to where you think you'd like it to go and how you get there as a team working together, and like I say, always for the mutual benefit.
I firmly believe that we can and we should work together. I think the opportunities are vast. There's no doubt when we look at our stakeholders, there'll be some of those that perhaps feel a little unsure about how we do that. And, you know, we've got to acknowledge that we're on a first step of trying something different here. And, you know, trust needs to be built between our jurisdictions as well as with our stakeholders. But I think that, you know, a few wins will be able to demonstrate that we can learn and deliver a lot of value by us working together. That doesn't mean that we all have to be carbon copies, far from it. You know, we've all got our own assets and our own capabilities that are unique or specific to ourselves. So I think we can learn from each other and then move forward in the direction that best suits our own jurisdictions. There will, of course, as I say, there'll be a few naysayers, but I think, you know, once they start seeing the value being created, I firmly believe that you know, people look back on this video and think that it was absolutely the right thing to do. So I'm very hopeful of that.
I'd love to come up with something different, but I have to agree with what Lucy said about the cultural barriers. That, you know, I think we need to remember that we're all on this call because we're living in a digital world, which is very much more collaborative and open. You know, I often think about, you know, we publish all our strategy work, we publish everything online. There are other parts of, whether it's government, other industries that said, why do you do that? Other jurisdictions will be able to see it. And well, what's the problem with that? You know, what does it matter? We're not, as we said at the beginning, we're not really competing. So I think it is about educating people how the world is working. We can't be the fortress economies that we have been in the past. The world is changing, and the biggest risk to small jurisdictions is they get left behind. So I think they are cultural barriers. We have to convince other stakeholders of the benefits. You know, there are so many examples, you know, looking at Lucy, there are so many examples of where there's even less cooperation between two islands very close to each other with similar issues. And while I think there's good reason why we can't work together on everything, there are some examples where, you know, we should have single regulators across the island. That situation has got worse. I'm optimistic that we have a new government that I think wants to embrace working more collaboratively, and I have high hopes for that. But I think it's back to something Lyle said. Maybe I'm a great believer. This is no different from when you're doing a deal between two companies. You might have a lot of medium and long-term opportunities, but find a few short-term wins. Show people what good looks like. Show people some examples. If we can do it here, and there are benefits to us as well, there are other jurisdictions, and maybe it's skills. We all talked about skills. Maybe it's courses. Maybe it's teaching. Maybe we do that, and then we've got some examples to show the naysayers, as others have said, that there are real, tangible benefits of interjurisdiction cooperation. And that's the way we change the culture, because I don't think there is anyone in this call that wouldn't say all of our jurisdictions would benefit from a more modern digital culture than we have now. Because although I'm sure all of our cultures have changed, they've all improved, the world is changing constantly, and we all have to do the same.
I think we've already taken some of those steps. So we've gone around. I know that certainly Jersey and Guernsey have been working together and talking with each other quite a lot over the years. But certainly from an Isle of Man perspective, we've been out and we've visited each of those jurisdictions, and we plan to continue with that dialogue as well. I think we're having a group call like this, as Tony says, without the cameras, will be highly beneficial as well, and start learning. I think it's the first step has been taken.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the first step has been taken, the fact that we're here today and discussing this, and it's really just almost setting out like a bit of a roadmap, and how we would do that to overcome the known issues that we would hit. So would we want to include in the discussions some of the private sector firms? Would we want them to, contribute their knowledge and experience to the process, but also help calm the waters before they get too choppy, and say, look, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. But I think the first step, clearly, it will be the second step now, is to, amongst ourselves, decide exactly what we want to do, how we're going to do it, what the objectives are, et cetera, et cetera. And for that, there's no other way that I know of doing it other than just sitting down and thrashing those sort of details out, and really getting that common agreement as to where we're going to go. There'll always be nuanced differences for sure, but nonetheless, we can set a path for the right sort of direction that we want to travel in.
So just by doing this call, and over the last couple of years, we've seen the world has changed. I don't have to struggle to get to the Isle of Man in November, though I'm sure it would be beautiful when you're actually having this conference. I'm sure the sun will be shining and there'll be no fog at the airport. But yes, we can do this thing more easily than we would have probably done it. We could have done it anyway, but COVID has made us realize we have the tools to do this. By our very nature, we are insular communities. We don't mean to be, but we get caught up in our own issues. And I think there's no substitute for actually getting some regular catch-ups in the diary and maybe work out a few streams of activity we can work on. Not every stream has to have all of us involved. There might be a few things that make sense for 2 or 3 parties to get involved with, and sketch out the roadmap, as people have said, and who else we might have to involve. But I would say, a lot of these things fall down because they get too ambitious, too wide-ranging. Let's find a few areas. As I said, we always talked about skills. Find a few things that we can definitely, confidently work on together, and use that as a basis to bring other people in and widen it. And then hopefully we'll almost get people addicted to working together. Now, there's a thought.
So I agree with everyone. I think we've made really good steps already, and really looking forward to working with everyone moving forwards. And I think actually an important element of that, to Paul's point, is how we bring our existing industry into that conversation pretty quickly. A lot of our larger organisations are working across the jurisdictions, so I think there's some great opportunity to work through working with those industry partners, but also for some of our smaller scaling businesses, they're already working on branching into different jurisdictions, and so thinking about actually what they have to say in terms of what would facilitate more working practices through the islands, I think would be really beneficial as quite early doors in terms of the conversation.
I think Lucy makes a brilliant point, and not something I'd thought about off the top of my head, that we do have a lot of big organisations that work across all the jurisdictions, or certainly the Crown dependencies, but I imagine Gibraltar as well. And we can exchange notes when we talk again about which are the ones that we think are the particular digital champions. I'm not going to say which in case I leave someone out and they're in the audience for your event when this goes out. But yeah, and then we can find things to do with those organisations where we know we've got a strong foundation for cooperation. So that's a really good idea, Lucy.
So I think it's fair to say that there's a lot we can learn from each other. We now need to kind of figure out a plan of how we can work together so we can solve some of our common issues. We've talked about skills and how we can solve that. We've talked about how we deal with the culture and the stakeholders and bring them on the journey, focusing on quick wins, and starting off this journey of collaboration and learning between us. It's been fantastic to speak with you all today. So thank you, Paul. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, Tony, for taking the time to speak with us and allowing us to record it as well, so we can share it at today's event. I think there's a great opportunity for the future. I hope we'll be able to come back together in a year's time and talk a little bit more about what we've done together and some of the things we're working on. Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.